So I'll chop it up a little bit at the end and put some kind of intro. The recording has been started. So yeah, so we're just going to hang out and talk about food revolution, right? And I have Bobby Fry here, and I have his wonderful
Communications director.
And your whole name is?
Alaina Weber.
Alaina Weber. See, I didn't know that. I didn't want to be presumptuous, so I just kind of was like going with it. I guess we're just kind of talking about Pittsburgh's food scene, but more importantly, probably how Pittsburgh food scene can be more integrated into communities. Like that sort of thing.
I think the interesting thing we were just talking about that I was excited to jump in here. I was like, man, we should record this. Was because I know nothing about it too much. Is you're talking about the interesting parallels between the tech community and what stage we are as a city with tech development, and what my 2 cents are on what our development is like as a city with food and what directions it can go from here, right? So, one of the things that I talk about all the time, and the reason why, food revolution is so, I'm so passionate about it and so driven, right? Like my eyes are popping open at 4 a.m, and I'm like, well, I guess we get in the shower and go to send some emails. Is because part of it's excitement, and part of it though too is it's like when we're all watching the Steelers and they have the lead at halftime. Nobody's making a victory lap, right? So anything can happen in any direction, and it's almost a bit scary in a sense to say, hey, we've got this thing that people really love, right? We've got Bar Marco and Livermore, and people are kind of digging it, and I'm like really happy about that. But it's also, we want it to be a 30 or 40 year restaurant, and something that we're really proud of. Like when we go to the Dish right now, and Michaela and Andrea have been there for 13 years or more. That's cool. So it's there's nothing cool about owning something that somebody would consider trendy that goes out of business in 3 years, or that there's nothing cool about being named top new food city by Bon Appetit unless you live up to that title and actually make a difference. So I don't know what your thoughts and feelings are on where we are with tech or how that relates to other cities. But.
Well, I think it's just interesting, right? Because there's these two burgeoning communities, and they're both really presenting themselves as being very strong and learning kind of how to get their own feet underneath them. And what's interesting are these relationships that are forming to, I don't know if it's promote or if it's sort of solidify kind of what's been built already, but it definitely takes this kind of collaborative and I don't know, more wrong word, but sort of just this idea that you have to extend past your brand and engage people that are more broadly out in the community other than just this niche that you have become part of, right? So where do you guys sort of see collaborations going with the different chefs in the city, or with the chefs in the city and the startup people, or the chefs in the city and just people kind of out in the wild?
Well, we can kind of talk to precedent of other cities and what directions they could go. Precedent number one would be most recently Atlanta, right? So Atlanta has had some of the most well-recognized chefs in the country here and there, and bursting onto the scene, if you will. And but there was an article in Atlanta Magazine just a few weeks ago where they said, hey, we have all these celebrated chefs, but guess what? We still have 500,000 people that have a 2-hour commute to a grocery store. Now, I'm not a fan of sticking a grocery store in the hood as the first move, because the kids, the community members, just see it as like a bigger Sunoco or a bigger convenience store, right? We need to put tools and skills in communities, and then demand for raw ingredients to grow itself, so to speak.
Yeah. So, well, and that's something we think about here a little bit, right? So we're in Allentown. It's a total food desert, right? Like you go to the convenience stores up here, and they don't even have diet soda. Right? No kidding. Like you can't even get a Diet Coke. Like you have to buy this giant 400 calorie monstrosity that's full of processed sugar and all the stuff that everybody knows is horrible. It's the new cocaine, right? Like processed sugar. And we worry that we'll pull something together here but it just won't be utilized, right? Like we'll find a way, grant money, collaborations with different people to kind of bring a more nutritious sort of set of products into the neighborhood, but it'll just be rejected because culturally it's not the norm. So
you just hit the nail on the head. Culture, right? So whenever we talk to the kids and whatnot, we don't talk to them about being healthy. We talk to them about building culture around their experiences with food, right? So we talk to them about, hey, if you know how to cook, you're starting a date now. You can have more interesting dates and more wholesome dates, than going out to eat. And it being awkward, you can throw dinner parties with your friends. After school, instead of lining up at the gas station across the street, you can have a cultural experience with your friends. You can play music and have fun with your cooking tools. And I think maybe the interesting thing about people not knowing what direction something will go, or not knowing what would happen or what kind of option to bring to Allentown or the other neighborhoods is it's kind of like the same thing you had on Wall Street, right? So most of the traders I interacted with on Wall Street, not even necessarily on my own trading desk, but other trading desks and general consensus when you see people posting things and comments, was that they didn't have any understanding of financial history. Not just their financial history began the day they went onto the trading desk. Right? There is precedent in this world. There's precedent for food, and there's precedent for trading. The Livermore is named the Livermore because of the story I know of Jesse Livermore from 1907 and 1929, shorting the crashes, boy plunder. Like I had what I considered a solid understanding of, even if it was philosophically, of why the market was doing what it was doing in my short period as
okay, so this sounds really interesting because I know nothing about you. So let's dig into this because I don't think a lot of people know anything about you other than you own Bar Marco and the Livermore, right? So
there's a lot of misconceptions. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
So start from like when you were this big and like take us through the 15-minute story arc or the 5-minute story arc.
I think I got out of diapers when I was 6. So it was graduation day from college.
You skipped the part about the red Jeep.
Oh man, yeah, I finally got a real Jeep because I had this ballin' little red.
When he's like 6.
Ballin' in a red Jeep.
Yeah. Ballin' in this little red tight Jeep. It's pretty great.
Yeah, man, I wish I would have kept that one. But yes, I mean, on graduation day from college, it's like, I can credit my mother with this a lot too, with kind of encouraging me just to always do things that were interesting and see where they went, right? Just do things because you believe in them to prove a point, right? And it was like, I didn't even have a resume, and my roommate's dad on graduation day, and I helped him pass his marketing exam, said, why don't you come work for me in New York? I'd never been to New York City. And I was like, done, let's do this thing, right? I'll work on Wall Street, let's see what happens. He's like, yeah, I've had conversations with you. I think you'd fit in really well on a trading desk. And I was like, all right, well, that's cool. And I don't know anything. I didn't pay any attention in college. I didn't necessarily like my college experience. I mean, it was surrounded by a lot of good people, but I think I picked the wrong school or location-wise because it was in the middle of nowhere.
So where'd you go to school?
Good question.
Again, a lot of good people, but Susquehanna University, so I was in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. And for a kid that came from Greensburg, I didn't really go very far to go 3 hours east. I wish I would have taken those 4 years and been in another country or something like that. On the trading desk, it started to become pretty good at what I was doing, which was picking up lunch. And it sounds funny, right? Like picking up lunch, I was really, really good at picking up lunch for everyone, right? And I had this little system worked out, right? There were about 25 people on the trading desk other than me. I was the only one in my 20s. I was 22 years old, and the room was split. For breakfast, there were like 4 different delis that the guys liked, right? So I had to go to 4 different delis, and if you screwed up an order, I mean, that bag would get thrown at your head, right? So So I ended up, since these guys were paying for it, giving me cash anyway, these guys always thought that I skimmed off the money. I didn't skim off the money. And they expected me to, right? They thought I would be a dope if I didn't skim off some of their money and give them back, shortchange them on the way back. That's how these guys think. I would actually tip out all the Mexican guys and the cooks at these delis, right? So I would take the breakfast order, and I would go drop it off, handwritten, to all 4 delis, because they were in like a 4-block circle.
Yeah.
And then I would circle back to all 4 and pick it up. So it was like the most efficient way possible to get everything right. And whereas, kids on other trading desks were spending an hour and a half getting breakfast. So they would purposely, I came to learn that they literally did this on purpose, because that's how traders taught them how to be good at what they did. The guy that got their breakfast or lunch first was always, the ace. Well, I didn't have anybody else to go up against, but I was an ace just because, I wanted to problem solve this thing and not get yelled at when I got back and be like, look, man, I'm ready to trade. Like, looks like fun,
Yeah. So, these early lessons, they carry with you into the restaurant industry, or is this
comes back to breakfast sandwiches,
or is it is that kind of trite?
No, that is exactly what carried, because I'm not a particularly innovative bartender, but I think I'm a really, really good bartender because I really understand people and I love the people that are coming in. But I'm ultra efficient behind a bar, right? From when I wash glassware to when I greet someone to how I'm thinking about this the whole time. I've greeted this person, they feel comfortable, that's great, and then I know this other person. So it becomes less about, doing this rhythmic thing and more about doing what's most efficient in that moment, right? I think that's a big part of how the 4 of us started out. Michael's really good at that stuff too, and Justin and Kevin are just such genuinely good people.
Yeah.
That I think that's a big reason why people came back, because they certainly didn't come back because they're experienced. Our food, our first cocktails at Bar Marco, the only cocktail shaker we had came from Justin's mother's. Or Justin's apartment in Shadyside. Most of our cookware came from our mother's houses or something. We opened up, we had $76 left to our names. But we started to get this thing on Wall Street where you really realize that, hey, this market is incredibly inefficient. Mm-hmm. There's no process. And this guy Keith McCullough, who has Hedgeye, he became my mentor, because this guy was a hockey player and he made, he was almost it's very much philosophical about, things that made common sense. Like, hey, some people stick to a 1-factor model. You'd have some, jackass come up and say, well, I look at gold every morning to start my morning. So why would you look at the same thing every morning to start your morning? Gold isn't the same significance every day. You've got 1 factor in your model, and Keith's model had 27 factors, all these things that he would take time to consider first, right? Then you start reading about Jesse Livermore, and he said, this amazing trader, and he said, anytime I screwed up, it's because I didn't follow my own rules. Anytime I lost money, it's I didn't follow my own rules, right? So he took a lot of those things with you, and you started to realize that, when people weren't taking me seriously because I was 23, and I thought, the direction of this trade was going to go this way. And I'm like, well, I've done a lot of homework and watched this thing. It makes sense to me. And they wouldn't listen to me. They're like, no, that's not what everyone else is saying. But I was listening to people from 200 years ago that are saying, you're right. I had the same experience, and I read what they had to say. And going back to, the 1600s, there's episodes of this with the tulip bubble. I don't know if you've ever heard of the tulip bubble. These are pretty stereotypical, stories that people in business school study, or if they will. But, the price of a tulip, I believe the way it goes, went from being worth, 1 ear of corn to being worth 2 carriages, which wasn't sustainable.
Obviously, because tulips are awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, man, but they weren't awesome enough.
Have you considered putting tulips in Bar Marco or at the Livermore?
Jamocha and Sarah love
like
flowers.
A flower explosion.
Man, they have just taken us from this loved or hated bro fest, brightening up us these boys. It's like, thank goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a gift and a curse sometimes, but thank goodness. So, I mean, we were, that's why we get along well as business partners, though, because we're still, 7th graders on the YMCA basketball court. And if something's wrong, we'll scream at each other, and we'll have it fixed.
Duke it out, and then it's over.
Duke it out, and then it's over. It's like, and as we become, more consistent, and we're actually paying ourselves regularly instead of just like paying our rent out of our markup or whatever, whatever money is there. That's what we.
So you're really passionate about food education, right? Like that. This is kind of what you hope to bring with Food Revolution. So, strengthen that in our community, right?
Yeah, there's all kinds of motivations. I mean, when I was growing up, I was good at golfing because I hated golfers. They were and I grew to have good relationships with all of them eventually, but they had things I didn't have, and I was like, well, I can play that game. Wall Street, I was good at trading or at least I understood it well because I thought it was inefficient. I didn't like the system. And then, we opened Bar Marco because it was Justin's dream, and both of our fathers were dying at the time, and that's why I ended up back in Pittsburgh. And then,
so elaborate on that story a little bit, because people don't know you, right? Like we know people know Bar Marco.
So I left. So after 3 years on Wall Street, my last 6 months were pretty incredible. I opened up 1 year before I left. I was the youngest person really in the history of the company to open up an institutional account, so a hedge fund account. And they didn't send me much business, but just the fact that happened, at least some people, I started getting taken seriously. And then my morning note, which was my real job during the day, was to do all the homework for the traders essentially and keep them abreast when things were changing. And I wrote a note that went out at 7 a.m. every day, and out of nowhere, it got ranked in the top 3 morning notes on Wall Street by Institutional Investor, which is really
prestigious, like an honor, right?
Oh, yeah, it was just something that said, okay, this kid's, because when you're someone that has a lot of ideas, it's like even with the idea of opening a restaurant, unless you follow up and actually pull it off and do them,
sure,
people, haters gonna hate as they
well, and that's the kiss of death when you're doing your pitch, right? Like, I'm an idea guy, like automatically anybody who's an investor just tunes you out.
And now it's like, no, I'm a get shit done guy. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I want to get things done because it's fun. That's when it's really fun. So. I don't know where we were.
So, like, how Bar Marco became a thing, right?
Yeah, so then we kind of, I was at a point where I put on this trading call where I said, retail stocks are going to explode again, because I read a guy named Ellis's book. He was #1 institutional investor from II for 22 years at Goldman in the retail space. He's like, everyone gets this wrong. Everyone thinks that consumer spending doesn't come back until after employment. Right? It's kind of the same thing we're talking about with putting food in neighborhoods, right? And putting a grocery store in. People can't eat healthy unless they have a grocery store. No. People can't eat healthy unless they demand to eat healthy. And then filling the supply is easy. People start spending money, and that's what brings the economy back. You've fired so many people, maybe you give some people raises, then the people that get raises and when building starts happening again, that's pure disposable income for them. So the market was betting that these things were going to take another 8% drop. I was betting they were going to take a 1% drop to going up 1% in sales, which means the stock price would go up 20% because everybody was placing their bets. Right? Oh my God, it's wrong. We got to get out of this trade. So the trade was up 22% in 3 days. And then I was getting interviewed by some hedge funds at the age of 25. And I read about Jesse Livermore and how, at the end of his illustrious career, he retired and then committed suicide because, I don't know, it seems like, he could have put all of that genius to a better,
he was searching for meaning.
Oh, that's cute.
So it's
it's true. It's in the book. I read the book.
Is it like Carnegie-esque guilt? Like, Carnegie, the story is makes all this money,
and then him and Freck, and then they both, 100 libraries or whatever.
Yeah, to repent, so to speak. So is Bar Marco's you repenting then?
No, I wish I would have got to the point where I had enough money to repent. So I turned down the hedge fund things. I could have probably went to one of the hedge funds and started to make some real money. And I knew I wasn't going to do this the rest of my life.
Sure.
But I wanted to go do it for 3 or 4 years and make a bunch of bank so I could bounce and then start a restaurant. But that's not how it works because I read.
Okay, so now I need to interject, right? So you're this hedge fund guy. You're from Greensburg. You went to this small school, right? So how do you know to cook? How do you know how to cook?
Well, I don't know how to cook that well, so I'm not the chef at Bar Marco. But when Michael and I lived in New York, he started working part-time. He was an architect. He started working part-time at a wine and liquor store. And he started bringing home super interesting bottles of wines at night. And while I was on Wall Street, I got to go out, especially every Thursday night to some like incredible restaurants. And, coming from Greensburg, I didn't have access to what
Chili's, right?
Yeah, right? For what the possibilities were, right? And there's some great old school Italian restaurants there, which I still love to go to. But as far as like sushi, like no way, man. So when I went to Bond Street for sushi and I walked in and like two of the Charlie's Angels girls are sitting at the bar. I go upstairs and one of the craziest parts. So I was asking the girl, what is, can I eat this? It's like, it's still moving. Now it's like, Jesus, But one of the craziest parties was my first hedge fund party that I got invited to, and it's because like a bunch of traders got sick, and they're like, all right, we'll bring him. He passed his Series 7. He's holding his weight. It's like 4 months in. My suits still don't fit me well. I'm like weird and still dressing like
middle school dance, kind of awkward.
Yeah. Just, and so I roll in. This hedge fund rented out the entire. Was it the Pink Elephant, right? So these guys were up like 40% or something crazy that year. They blew $1 million on this party. There's 200 of us there. There's like guys in little suits pouring out of mega magnums. I don't even know what. I gotta call Michael and figure out what that is. You go with Magnum and Jeroboam and there's names and pouring champagne. So I'm going nuts, and there's this like table of 4 gorgeous girls. I'm like, oh man, there's no like, and I'm drinking Johnny Walker Blue Label for free. Everything's free. I'm like, whoa, man. And it's like they still didn't have a good taste in scotch because Johnny Walker Blue is fine, but you can get some interesting things for cheaper, right? So I sit down with these like gorgeous girls, and I'm like mucking up, and they're laughing with me, and I'm just like, having a blast, right? And
that guy.
Yeah, right. And then all of a sudden, somebody pulls me from my ear and pulls me out of that, little couch area. I'm like, what's up, man? It's like our head trader. He's like, those are the guys that own the hedge funds that are wives. I'm like, no, but those girls are like my age. He's like, oh dear God. Like,
you just don't get it.
We're going to send you back to Greensburg. I was like, well, they weren't so upset. I'm like, their men are. So I was like, okay. So then around 11:30, 2 guys come out with their top hats on. I grew up with my dad watching, Dan Aykroyd movies and stuff that were whatever. And it was Dan Aykroyd and Jim Belushi, obviously, doing the Blues Brothers routine. So these guys hired, and I'm like taking a picture to send to my dad on my flip phone or whatever it is. I'm like, you won't believe this.
So they actually had Jim Belushi and Dan Aykroyd at the party. Like,
oh yeah, then we're drinking, Johnny Walker with them afterwards, and I'm like, man,
it's a different life. So how do you go from that? Like,
So I went from that to saying like, okay, I'm not going to do this the rest of my life, and I actually went to Corning, New York for 6 weeks.
What was in Corning, New York?
A startup macroeconomic based fund, and it was when I say startup, I really believe in this guy, so I turned and he's still a wonderful person, and he's doing really well, and I moved into his attic, right, which was also our office, and in the attic also lived his mother-in-law. It was a beautiful house, and he had 2 really cute kids, and I had a great time there for 6 weeks. But it was pretty clear after 6 weeks that I'd have to be. First of all, my $600 that I left Wall Street with was gone in 6 weeks in Corning, which actually gets you really far in Corning. It's an awesome town if you've ever been. And so I was just like, look, man, I gotta go. So at that point, though, Michael and I started throwing a lot of dinner parties in New York, and or at least cooking for ourselves and drinking a lot of wine, and then inviting over our friends. And this one particular night, so Michael had a friend. Michael's father grew up in Brooklyn, and his father's friend, was a corporate lawyer, I think NBC or something. A beautiful 4-story brownstone, but this place was like the Tannenbaums. It was a disaster inside. So this guy's making mega bank. He's got 5 kids running around the house. They've got like this, I think it was like a Jamaican cleaning lady, and her and the mom would like sit around the smoke pot during the day, and Michael and I would steal her pot.
Yeah.
It was hidden in the.
Not very well. It was hidden not very
No,
well.
it was hidden incredibly well. But we would cook there sometimes, and when you open the dishwasher, the panel above it was loose, and it was back in
Seems
there.
like a lot of work.
Oh man, yeah. Well, it kind of popped up easy. Like I said, everything in this house was very expensive and an absolute disaster, right? So we ended up having to Michael had a house sit, and he called up his friends in the wine industry and said, "Hey, we're going to cook from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. and bring your coolest wines you can." So I think maybe for that night, because everybody in the wine industry, all like 10 or 20 people, whatever, brought like 3 of the coolest bottles, and which they all got it like 40% off of the cost. So we cooked till 8 a.m. So then I go to Corning. I'm like, after 6 weeks, it's the 4th of July in 2010, and I call Justin. I'm like, man, you got to come pick me up. I'm screwed. So he came up and we cooked a feast on. I'm like, I'm out of money, and we cooked a feast for this guy and his family and all of his friends that he threw over for 4th of July. And Steele and I was having a blast cooking together. And I used to cook for his family back when I still remembered how. And I came back home and moved into my grandmother's basement. So I essentially went from more or less the top of opportunities, foot in the door of Wall Street, to grandma's basement in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting. So I'm like,
so was that a did you know you were doing that at the time? Was class on your mind? Was wealth on your mind? Or were you more interested in satisfaction at that point? Because you're still really young, right? Like,
I mean, well, at that point, I literally didn't have anywhere else to go. And had nothing. And it's like, I knew at that point, though, that I was going to be able to do whatever I wanted. Because on Wall Street, I proved to myself that I could be really, really good at something that I wasn't passionate about. Mm-hmm. And what I learned on Wall Street was exactly what I needed to learn, because I was a nutcase in college. I was all over the place. I was so driven, and I wanted to be, in golf, and I wanted to be, a professional golfer for a time. And I had the work ethic for it. And I had the knowledge and perspective for it, but I didn't have the organization. And on Wall Street, I learned how to be an organized person. And I learned how to be regimented, and I learned how to, if you'd see my notebook from back then, you'd be like, holy cow, it's awesome, right? I built my own process. Yeah. Where in college, I never felt comfortable enough to build my own process. Yeah. And it was kind of fun because it only happened because I was around some pretty good guys on Wall Street who were in their 40s or 50s or whatever, but I was mostly left alone to do that. The kid that they fired, right? He failed his Series 7 3 times. This guy would he would screw everything up and blame things on concussions in college or something. The guy was, so when I came in, at least I was hungry and whatever, yeah. And they're like, great, this kid's a blessing compared to that guy. He's a little green, but we'll work on it. So
you had this sort of older dudes temper you, kind of focus you and bring you into some sort of, put you in a box a little bit, and that's helpful.
Yeah, right. They put me in the box, and they were still little kids themselves, though, in a sense. But I wasn't. In college, I felt like people didn't believe I could accomplish the things I wanted to, mm-hmm. and I let that really affect me. Right. The other guys on the golf team were all wonderful people, and they were very good golfers, and our golf team was incredible. But they never wanted to be professional golfers in any sense, and I did, and they were all better golfers than me. So I didn't feel comfortable, I didn't feel like anybody around me really believed in me much. They all liked me, but they didn't believe in me, and I let that affect me. Whereas on Wall Street, I didn't care if a bunch of these guys who are 20 years older than me believed in anything or not, because I'm like, the market's falling apart right now, buddy, and you don't have any orders, so I don't know what to tell you. I wasn't concerned with it anymore. Yeah. And I got to break out of that shell, and I got to surround myself with things that were not Wall Street oriented. Yeah. And when I went on that, I got to see young people doing things in New York who had no idea the market was collapsing.
Didn't care. It didn't matter to them.
Yeah, I got to see music. I had a couple of the guys on the trading desk really take me under their wing, who were awesome people, like my buddy Tom Stiers, who would take me to shows and took me to different venues across New York. But then, I sitting in Grandma's basement, I was really amped to go bartend somewhere, believe it or not, just because I realized, hey, 3 years in New York, I went to New York. I'd never been to New York City before. I should just go somewhere else and experience that and see where it takes me, right? So I'm looking everywhere to see, where I might go next. And within a week of me moving back, my dad got diagnosed with lung cancer. And, Justin's dad had been, sick for a couple of years. And then, so I ended up moving into Shadyside with Justin and the Walnut Grill. I was like, hey guys, I have no experience, but I was on Wall Street, trust me. Look at my Wall Street notebook, I will figure this thing out, right? So I had to learn how to do inventory from those guys. They were incredible. They paid me more per hour than they should have. Justin, at that point, I owed him $800. So they started to let me, pay. I was making at least enough that Justin was covering my rent. I moved in with him in Shadyside, and I got to start paying Justin back. And we were, one of the funniest things was, right, so I had things to talk about, so I always got into interesting conversations, but one night they called me at the Walnut Grill, and they're like, hey, we're down the server tonight, can you come in? I'm like, oh wow, this is my big break. Because finally I can just, go serve people instead of being this daytime bartender and unloading boxes. And so I put on my Wall Street shoes, right? These $300 church and tweeds, right, out of London. And I put on my Wall Street black pants and like one of my whatever shirt I had to wear. And I show up, and I'm like, cool, what section am I in? Let's do this thing. And they're like, no. You're a server assistant. So that meant I had to, I was a busboy.
Yeah, glorified busboy, right?
$300 shoes. Yeah. And at the end of the night, I had to mop the restaurant. And
well, it was Walnut Grill, so you were,
It was.
I'm sure the patrons appreciated your shoes.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't even allowed to talk to him or something. I don't even know, but I remember just mopping the floor at the end of the night in my $300 shoes, thinking, well, this is interesting. How am I going to get out of this? How am I getting out of this, right? So Justin and I were out drinking, and so his dad was sick, and my dad was sick, and we're like 3 sheets to the wind, right? And we had started at that point something called Top Notch Events Company. Mm-hmm. And we were on like the American Entrepreneur for it. And even though we hadn't really done a dinner yet, but our plan was we were flying Michael back in from New York. He would fly in, and we'd go to people's houses and throw wine dinners, right? Mm-hmm. So a guy, David Iwinski, who I got connected to from somebody in Greensburg, was this weird connection. He's like, he really liked me, and he was like, all right, I'll pay you guys to come do your first dinner. So he paid us, and Michael and Justin and I showed up with my grandfather's war trunk full of cookware and wine, and we cooked in their kitchen and served all of his good friends. This was almost Christmas by that point. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, Justin had talked about, maybe wanting to open a restaurant one day. So we started pulling this off. We got the radio thing behind it. We had Michael build a website, and then we're kind of out. Our fathers are not doing well at this point. We're talking about December, near Christmas time. And so, we have this momentum of this weird thing that's not quite paying us and whatever. And so we've done a couple of dinners like for free, and I'd paid Justin his $1,800 by this point.
Yeah.
So whatever, and we're out, and we are just 3 sheets to the wind. And Justin's like, and we talked every day on Wall Street because he was at Federated on Bloomberg, and I was on Bloomberg every day, and we would, we're best friends in 7th grade. So we're 3 sheets to the wind. He's like, I never told you this. Marco and I actually tried to open up.
That's a good Justin voice.
Yeah, tried to open up I wish I had Justin's hair. The big flocky seagulls thing he's got going on. And he goes, I tried to open up a restaurant, a wine bar with Marco, and I gave up because, I was too busy with Federated. I'm like, so I look at him, I'm like, what do you mean you tried to open up a restaurant already? Who do you know? Yeah. I'm busting my ass right now to get us connections to like people that own vacant buildings or whatever. Yeah. He's like, I had keys to 3 restaurants, and Marco and I had an architect already draw everything up for all these places. And I cold out bitch slapped him right there in the bar. And I was like, give me 1 year and we were going to open a restaurant. And a year later, we opened Bar Marco. About 7 months later, we signed the lease. And and but you know, it was 4 months, I think, after that point where his father passed away during my father's funeral service. That's how tight it was.
Oh, wow.
They went to hospice on the same day, and it was like, you know, it was really, you know, a weird kind of thing. It was really helpful to, you know, for Justin and I that we went through at the same time, and you know, it was really a driving force to say, you know, we've got, you know, nothing to lose. And so it was really difficult because we took over the Firehouse Lounge, and it was such a beloved, and the story about how that happened is hysterical. So we were actually we were looking at a space in East Liberty that I'd still like to take over, even though we have the Livermore in East Liberty now. This place is prime if somebody needs to take it. It's on, Eddie Osun owns it. It's on Broad Street. It's right below the Throw Mill, and it's an old, like, 54-foot long standing bar where Welch's used to be. It's got this great sign outside that's grandfathered in, and we had it drawn up with, like, the silhouette of Marco on it. And for people that don't know, Marco is an inspiration to us and a cooking mentor to Justin. Marco went to Italy about 5 times a year. He was the executive chef for 35 years for D'Annunzio's, which has a location in Jeanette, Latrobe Airport, and Roeville. So Justin's mom worked there in her spare time for fun, and still does, doing like catering things for the D'Annunzio's. And Justin was a busboy, and Marco, you know, had him over to his house a bunch of times with his friends. And Marco had this incredible courtyard in the middle of Jeanette, right? That was like an escape into Italy. It had a stone fireplace outside, and he would have grapevines, and would take the old grapevines and stuff them in the fireplace and cook like Fiorentina, like huge steaks over the grapevines that are burning to give it that flavor, right?
Yeah.
And in his basement, he did, he had all this homemade wine, but he was such an OG, right? He was so old school that he had like 6 washers and dryers in his basement, and he would just sit around. He had these like speakers going all the time at his place, right? And his house was just filled with the most incredible things he bought in Italy over the last 30 years, from like plateware to like crazy serving spoons or cookware or trinkets, and it was eccentric as hell, and stuff was everywhere, but it all made sense where it was. When you saw it, it's just like overwhelming, right? So fast forward though, unfortunately, Marco actually passed away 3 months ago now. He was 57 years old. He just gotten back from another trip to Italy. I think it was like his 117th trip to Europe. Justin went to Europe with him like 3 times, and that's where Justin got inspired to open up a wine bar, right? Because he just went, regionally went to regional town spots that Marco had known the owners and the people in these towns for 30 years. So he got the inside treatment. And so he came, so back up, about a year and a half ago now or so, Marco was in Europe, and I think it was the busboys maybe, or whatever, whoever had to do the laundry. I think this is what might have happened in his basement. Didn't clean out the lint traps, and his house caught on fire and everything burned.
Oh, wow.
While he was in Europe, and that was a year and a half ago. And fast forward a year later, he moved in, with his mother right down the street. His mother's 93 years old and still runs the bakery that he grew up in. So in Jeanette, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's really incredible.
Rito Bakery. So he that happened over a year ago, and then 3 months ago, it was all down. But so we had this place picked out in East Liberty, and Michael, was tussling with leaving this life in New York where he was, really positioned to do great things, to come back here to help us open the wine bar. The plan was he would come back for a year, and then he would go back to New York and open up a wine store. So he's at the airport, he's talking to his mom, he's talking to me. He's like, all right, I'm doing it. I'm getting on the plane, right? So he gets on the plane, and Kevin and I are at Buffalo Blues and Shadyside, right? And just kind of hanging out, waiting for Justin to get out of a meeting with our lawyer or something. And he's like, Justin comes in, he's like, there's no way we can open this space in East Liberty. There was some something with the building and how we wanted to reuse it.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't pass code. This wouldn't happen. And So we're like, oh, great. Michael's literally in air right now. So we're supposed to pick him up from the airport. We had to call our friend Zach to pick us up at the bar then because we just get wasted.
When all else fails, tequila shot.
Oh, Jesus, right? So I'm like, I got to figure this out before he lands, right?
Quick, get me drunk.
Yeah, quick, yeah. It's like, bartender, get me in my zone or something. So funny. God bless this story. I don't know how this happened, but so we're getting drunk, and the guy beside us, the guy that works with Kevin at First Niagara, right downtown, he's like, listen to this story and listen to me like go on my insane pacing rants around the bar trying to figure out what to do so Michael doesn't kill me or when he lands. And he's like, my father's got a bar that's going to be coming up for rent in the Strip. And I'm like, oh yeah, great, buddy. Like the only thing I know about the Strip is the Firehouse Lounge in Embry, which was rocking still at that time and the place to be, and we loved it there. So that didn't even register with me. I'm thinking, oh great, I'm gonna take over one of these nightclubs that keeps going by.
Yeah, Whiskey Dicks.
Yeah, whatever, man. And so he's like, oh, Firehouse Lounge, and my tequila glass just dropped out of my hand. I looked at him and said, what? I'm like, what do you mean that's up? I'm like, that's our place, man. Like, what? Like, this is where we hung out and came up with a lot of our best ideas when we were back. We'd sit in Embry or we'd sit upstairs while we were at the Firehouse Lounge or on the deck while we were planning East Liberty, right? So I'm like, great, somebody call Zach. We got to go to the airport. So I roll into the airport. I'm like, I know how Michael is and I know how I am. And so I roll in, wasted to the airport. He was bringing back like 10 bottles of like super cool wines for us to drink and celebrate that he was back. And so he comes down the stairs and he sees me. He's like, are you drunk? I'm like, you listen to me, Michael. East Liberty is out. We're going to be in the Strip District. I know it. I can feel it. And he's like, we start screaming at each other in the airport, right? TSA's coming over. And so we're like running over to the Delta thing to get his wine back so he won't talk to me. And we're waiting there like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
The wine bag never shows up, right? So that just so then we have to go over to this
feels like a total bait and switch. Like,
oh my God, there's no wine. We're standing there in silence for 15 minutes. I'm like, Michael, he's not a word. And then we get into the car with no wine, and we're driving back, and I'm taking us. I'm like, Zach, take us to the new place. Take us to the Firehouse Lounge. I'll show Michael this. We walk in. He goes, all right, we're ripping out this vestibule. That wall's got to go. The drop-down ceilings, that's ridiculous. There's original tile under there. We got to rip up. If we rip up these floors and polish and he was just in, right? And so we just went back to the apartment and, just got to work. And, we signed the lease on nearly that funding. We got some money from when, Justin's father passed away. Justin kept his job at Federated so that Michael and I could live.
Sure.
Right? So that's how he did it, and that's how we did it, and how we had money for it. And Kevin had some savings from living in Pittsburgh for 4 years and living properly and saving up his money while I worked at the bank. And we had just enough to get, because liquor licenses weren't nearly that expensive at that time. We found a hell of a deal on one. We got a couple of months of free rent from our landlord.
So what year is this?
This is 2010. So us and Cure actually opened on the same day.
Okay.
Which is kind of funny, but Salt of the Earth had just opened up.
Sure.
It was just starting to get weird, right?
Right.
It was just starting to be some chefs here who were all talking about their own places, and one guy, really, I hope I'm not forgetting someone. I mean, not one guy, because you had, Trevitt had really set the bar with Legume, but in a very, very small space, right?
Yeah.
And Kevin Sousa was opening up Salt.
So this is sort of it's not the beginning, but this is where the foodie culture gets momentum in Pittsburgh, right? Like this point in time when Kevin's doing this.
Was the huge bang from what I remember from, I'm sure Justin saw a lot more signs coming up to it though. I mean, obviously, Big Burrito had proved that, there could be good
it could
food.
Be done.
Yeah. That's
on scale.
And even though it's Big Burrito's got kind of some, it was more corporate, clearly. but it wasn't. It was Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah, it wasn't the chef owner, right? It was
right, exactly. So it wasn't a direct inspiration to say, "Oh man, look, Big Burrito's doing it.
Sure.
A couple of jackasses from Greensburg can do it." No, but it was proved that okay,
they laid some ground.
Yeah, if you do something, there's people here that are going to like your good food if you make good food. Michele and Andrea have been doing it at Dish on the scale that we wanted to do it for 13 years. At that point, only 10 years. So we knew that, and you had E Squared just opened up, I think, right around then on Bryant Street, and doing amazing things that people cared about. And you had all these little seedy little pockets of like people that kind of cared, right? And you had, for me, as being a market guy, I'm looking at population trends, and okay, well, this is the first year Pittsburgh's had positive. That was the first year in 50 years that there was positive population growth. It literally every year in Pittsburgh proper there was a drop in population until that year. And
the drop in population has to do with the age demographics.
Well, yeah, then it was coming up to like we're 3 years, 26 to 34-year-olds were up like, 12% or something like that. So there were some young people who were like, okay, all right. Michael and I still going crazy because it wasn't New York and everybody was in our way, Yeah. So, we probably offended some people along the way. I'm sorry about that.
Are you though?
But, yeah, you learn over the course of a couple of years. It's probably a big thing with Jamoka and Sarah too, to learn how to. I'm still fired up as it gets, but you learn how to be a more understanding person of the little moments, and you grow up a little bit, and with some success that happens too, where you're not so gung ho or ready to prove a point. It's not life or death anymore. It could be if a certain series of events happen, but those events aren't happening, and everything's pointing upwards. You're growing up, right? And you can feel it. It goes back to, oh my God, how did I miss the biggest inspiration of all of us in Pittsburgh? Piccolo Forno with Round Corner Cantina across the street. Those guys were our big brothers, right? Like we didn't know Sousa, we didn't know Trevitt. Justin ate at those places, and they certainly, as much as they were grinding and pulling off these things, didn't have time for us. But Dom and Derek. Dom knew Justin from college, and we would go eat pizza at 4 a.m. there when he'd reopen it back up for his friends after we all went out together. And they were the guys that we could bring our business plans to and say, hey,
is this bullshit?
Yeah, and can I pull this off? Like, yeah, sure, you can pull this off. One of the few people that said you're not nuts, right?
Yeah.
And treated us literally like little brothers. And like their younger brothers.
So it's interesting because our community, like the hardware stores community, is the startup space, right? And it's very similar in a lot of regards. Like you have no resources, you have no real reason to be doing what you're doing. You probably aren't an expert in this thing that you're trying to create, and yet you still kind of through just fortitude pull things together, and then you're at the end you look back and you're like, I don't know how that all came together.
I have no idea, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you get into our first opening days, dear sweet mother. So we had, I'll never forget what Derek actually said this to us right after we signed the lease, and he's like, now this business is going to make you grow up. Now this business is going to make you become a better person, or you won't succeed. And that's where, and I'd always had this thing about, marketing. Marketing was going to be my thing. And I'm like, well, guys, money-wise, it doesn't make sense for us to advertise or to use, Groupon was still kind of right now Groupon, if you got it as a restaurant, you would think, unfortunately, you think there's something wrong, right?
Yeah.
And it was like Groupon, was
hip and cool and different.
Yeah, it wasn't as far outside of the box to even consider it, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't like that though. Michael certainly didn't like that, and I was like, guys, there's all these art events around town, right? And they're killing, and this gets into like Food Revolution, where they're like bringing in the people that we like hanging out with. And the food there is like a leaky keg in the middle of the room, and some saran wrap garbage. Yeah, like
a box one.
Yeah, right.
I always say it's not an art event until there's box one.
Right.
We're changing that.
We're on a budget.
Yeah, right. So I was like, look, if we
is
can,
there art on a budget too?
good. And one of the things we try to prove in
not only with our restaurant margins but with Food Revolution, is that good food isn't expensive if you know what to do with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to pay your cooks well and have a bunch of good people around, but your ingredients are coming from, local, and they're coming from, you're inspired by wine bars, which are serving, peasants food, and arancini was a, peasants food in Sicily, and you start to learn about, Michael had a degree in teaching me about a lot of these things about, hey, beef bourguignon was a peasant's food, sushi was a peasant's food, and poor artists create trends, and people that put heart into food, like Marco. Mm-hmm. You can serve good things, and the problem is when food becomes expensive is when you're either over-consuming it or you're wasteful and don't know what to do with it, right? So I was like, Michael, let's just go pour wine and put out some of our food at art events, right, and meet people. Mm-hmm. And I said, Amy Enrico was a huge inspiration to us at the time too, Tassadoro, because she's actually Marco's brother, and she, held her hand going around to meetings with landlords and whatnot. And so when she would tell us, she's like, boys, we first started, sometimes we were a coffee shop, we didn't get someone in here till noon. But I knew we were going to be okay because every person that came in had a wonderful experience. Mm-hmm. So I was like, all right, Michael, let's just, bank on that because we don't have any money to bank on anyway. So literally we first opened, we had $76 left between the four of us. We were living paycheck to paycheck off of Justin's paycheck.
Hope you don't run out of soap in the men's room.
Oh, man, right? Forget about that. Yeah. We should have made some Facebook posts then about bringing Purell. Yeah. So Justin would literally at that point, if Kevin needed some extra money, he might even ask Justin because he left First Niagara before Justin.
Yeah.
Because Justin was up for this huge bonus in the spring and which could really
stabilized everybody's.
It could stabilize us enough to open up for brunch, and that Justin, we could live off that $20,000, still not paying ourselves, and hope that brunch would be enough for us to pay our bills. And I was sleeping in the basement of Bar Marco, which was really actually quite fun because except during construction, whenever we had to grind the concrete floors, because construction dust went everywhere from none of us are probably going to live that long unless.
You're restaurateurs, so
we put masks over ourselves, and it didn't matter. You take the mask off and dump it out, and the pictures are incredible. Yeah, the concrete dust is so fine that even though we taped up the door, to the basement, Justin went down there to get something. When he came back up, he didn't retape it, thinking whatever. This is when we had one of those boy fights, right? Because all the dust, and it's in the basement. What do you think about it? I went downstairs. There was an inch of construction dust on my bed, on everything I owned, and I had set up this sweet little room in the basement. And I was thinking, it's like I'm a man that likes a good shower, and we're in a firehouse, man. It's got the best water pressure in the city, right? So I'd wake up in the morning, and I would start my day right, and put on my same pair of jeans and my $300 Wolverine boots from Wall Street that at that point were just offensive. I could, so, we opened, we just started going to these art events and doing these one-off things in the community.
So that was essentially your marketing, was engaging the community even back then.
Shaking hands and letting them know, and people were saying, you'd have to listen to. There was one time we were at Kelly's one night, and people hated us when we first opened, a lot of them, because we took over Embry and the firehouse. We're like, hey man, don't hate us, we loved it too. But someone had to sign the lease. I feel the same way about that I feel about how we just signed the lease at the Shadow Lounge to move sideways.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, guess what, man? I love the Shadow 92. When my father was dying, I went and I spoke some words on open mics and just sat there and hung out in there. And I was, it was a place that believed in ideas, and it was, everyone who's listened to this probably knows everything there's to know about how important the Shadow Lounge was. But guess what, man? If we didn't sign that lease at Shadow Lounge, I don't even want to tell you who it was, right? So there were
Chili's. I keep going back to Chili's.
Like that,
there needs to be a Chili's in the East End, is what I'm saying.
Well, there were a few people who looked at it and whatnot, and some of them would have been, fine fits, but it didn't fit their plan. But I was really, really, and not that Eve, the building owner, would let something completely
ridiculous.
But no, I was like, look, we got to take this thing, right?
It's such a monument to culture and what Justin had built there.
Yeah, and it's like, some kids who are, we might be white, but we're, hungry. And,
well, it's that first in, right?
I understand the adversity. I understand what adversity is, and I understand, and that's what we want to support. So for a kid who literally just wanted to open Bar Marco because it was my best friend's dream, I couldn't stand to hear that he walked away from it, to moving into, okay, now we're chugging right along here. Justin was walking from Bar Marco because he traded international bonds. So he was trading on European hours, which means he'd be out by 2, but in reality he would start leaving at 12:30 because it didn't matter. Nobody else, Justin was a prodigy of sorts. Meaning he was in like top percentile of taking the CFA exam, and so at that point, of his level 1 CFA. So at that point, he would just start leaving early because he knew they couldn't fire him, and that's fair. Like, it's an industry where, like, guess what, buddy? I don't feel bad for you. You're making a lot of money.
A lot of social Darwinism, right? Like,
sure, yeah.
Yeah, so
it's like, okay, it's part of the game, man.
It's like the Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, right. It's like, you guys don't understand, and fine, but he would walk through the strip district because he was downtown in his suit and his Justin dresses really well. He used to have these $40 socks when he was still employed that were from a guy called VK Negroni over the foot.
That guy.
Yeah, right. So we would go see his trunk. He met him in Pittsburgh at a trunk show in Livermore. At Larimer's, and then
not Lincoln Larimer.
No,
Larimer's.
No,
yeah, they're a little different.
Yeah, that's for sure. And then we'd hang out with him in New York when Justin would come to me. But then he would buy whatever we could afford in the strip. A lot of risotto on the menu in those days. It was, keeping inventory lean, and we didn't have a cocktail shaker, and my first cocktails were atrocious. But for some reason, we were a wine bar. That place was built to be a wine bar.
Yeah.
But people would just start ordering the cocktails and gravitate towards
that scene
because there was some of that going on in Pittsburgh. There's some, I think Maggie Meskey was at 11 at that time, and Sean Enright and Spencer Warren at Embry before we were there.
I thought about this, but even the expectation of people coming to the space of they came there before for cocktails.
Yeah, and everybody.
The transformation of what you guys were doing with wine, but then what people had come there for.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that's something that's interesting because I think that's the reason people didn't like us. And we were sitting at Kelly's, like you said, one night, and we'd overheard a group of bartenders who had loved Embry and service and stuff like talking serious smack on us, and they were talking about how we treated our employees poorly. This was 2 months before we opened. I was like, we don't even have employees.
I live in the basement, man.
What? Yeah, man. I was like, what are you talking about?
I'm a freaking employee.
Yeah. And so, we survived in those first couple of months because.
So how much of that is just kind of petty? Is it
100%? Yeah, 100%. It's whatever, man. It's an old city. It's an old mentality of what, sometimes it's hard working, but why take a chance? And, parents want you to be safe, and there's not up until the last 4 or 5 years, right? And it's getting back to what it used to be.
It's an interesting observation because, we, in the startup community, I think a lot of us feel that same way about even the institutional money and the angels in the city. They're still very much about where's your widget, kid, So.
Yeah, and it's, oh my God, it's pretty impressive over the last 3 or 4 years, the conversations we can have now.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally different.
Where
this is an example, right? This wouldn't have happened 3 years ago.
No.
Where a tech person was talking to a restaurateur with their communications director. Right?
Yeah, it's so fired up, man. When we walk in here, even at the opening party a year ago or
about that.
So,
about 10 months.
About 10 months ago, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I met some people that I have seriously close relationships with now. Where I met Joe Vanieri, right?
Yeah, Joe's awesome.
Joe is incredible, and he's become. We have been slaying some cool projects together, including Food Revolution, and the energy he's putting behind it. He did an No Many Monday with Velazzi's. At Bar Marco, and Velazzi's from Greensburg, and it's like
single-handedly filled that restaurant.
So let's take a couple minutes, and we'll cut this up into a smaller chunk so it's consumable, like talking about Food Revolution, since you guys are in the middle.